So obviously we'll be looking at workshops. So we have 8 in total. And I'll talk a little bit about the content. So the module outline is up on Loop. And at the moment, I'd give an indicative idea of what I will cover in each of the 8 weeks. But as I said, very much interested in this being a co-creation between us, and also then me being able to maybe talk about specifically different methodologies or approaches that you're interested in, that you want to find out more about, and also then that we can look at together. What I will try to do is also, and I think it's important, that we take a critical perspective. And again, this very much goes back to your viva and also, defending your choices. So it's very important to say, well, okay, this is the approach that you have selected, but you have to also be very much aware of its limitations, but hopefully its advantages or its benefits outweighs the limitations. So I do think, being able to take a critical stance, have a critical perspective is very important as well. We'll look at sort of the historical debates and disputes with regard to the different approaches, in terms of their advantages, disadvantages. The other thing, and I suppose we'll talk about this a bit later, is that, a lot of sort of the research statement, research problem is very much it's very much about a tension or a debate that you're either trying to add to or that you're trying to actually tackle or solve. So that's very much then the research question allows you to actually unpack this and to contribute or advance knowledge and some way either contribute to the debate or to minimize or to reduce the tension. But again, we'll talk about that in terms of the objective of research approaches and theories, because as I said, we cannot just talk about methods, separate from the research question, the theories, and also the data analysis. Everything is connected and they all contribute. So obviously the module is about qualitative research methods, but I will be injecting a little bit in terms of the research question, theory, and also the analysis as well. Hopefully we will be talking about intellectual thinking, academic thinking on the different approaches, and also, as I've said, the current debates. And I suppose, like everything else in life, when it comes to qualitative research methods, there are trends, there are methods which are more popular at a certain time, and we'll talk about that as well. And as I said, I hope, and this is one of my aims for this module, that it is a co-creation between all of us. So, very much welcome your ideas, thoughts, and input. So the assessment, which I have put up onto Loop, there are 2 parts. The first one, so it is a critical evaluation of 2 articles. And these are 2 articles that you are about to read or you have read. So this is not extra work by any means, because this would be part of your literature review, or maybe you've already looked at these 2 particular articles. So pick 2 articles, and I suppose if I was selecting 2 articles, I would select articles that, probably the 2 that I thought, oh, I wish I had written those. And, articles which have impressed you, that maybe you thought that the methods were innovative, and also something that you might like to, that would be sort of your goal in terms of that's the type of method that you'd like to replicate. So there's more details on Loop. It's you select 2 articles. It could be 2 really good articles. It could be a good article and a not so good article, because what you're going to do, you're going to write 500 words comparing them. And then that is going to, that's due on the 4th of December. So the other part of the assessment, which is a larger part, and it's worth 70%, and it's a qualitative study protocol. There's quite detailed guidelines on Loop in terms of what is required. So you would take your current research question, or one that you have developed, or one that you are comfortable with, and then you are going to develop what I would refer to as a protocol or a framework. And it's basically what you would do. So you are not conducting actual research. But it's more of a what I would do, or what it would look like if I did this. There's also an element which talks about the ethical issues. And I suppose it's something that within the business school we're all quite aware of at the moment. You know, moving, say, research methods, conducting them online does bring up ethical considerations, or slightly different ethical considerations. So this assignment will give you an opportunity to be able to look at that, address it, and also see, is there any relevance to your actual your project and your thesis. So some of the topics that we'll cover, and again, obviously this is, we're going to let this also unfold organically as well. We look at the theoretical foundation of different qualitative methodologies. We might look at the narrative approach, case study approach, discourse. Then we look at the appropriateness of specific qualitative methods to address research questions. And for me, the research question drives everything. So, and there has to be a connection. If I saw, a research question, and there was a disconnect between the methods, that obviously raises doubts. Then I start to think, can I trust this research? So there has to be a nice complementary between the research question and the research method. So they have to fit like a glove. We look at some data collection skills in terms of, we look at obviously interviewing, conducting interviewing. We might actually do a little bit of role playing there. We look at focus groups, and also we look at observation as well. And I suppose that's one of the things, whenever we do qualitative research methods, we normally maybe actually do 2 or 3. So you might do semi-structured interviews, but you might also do non-participant observation as well. And I know for myself, one of the challenges for that is, how do you actually present that data? How do you actually, and one of the things whenever we're presenting data, that you want a person who's reading it to feel they were in, I was going to say, the room with you, or they were on the Zoom interview with you. So that's a skill in itself, because particularly when you have qualitative research, Bill Gartner refers to the critical mess. Qualitative research will generate, volumes of data, but it's actually trying to work out, what is relevant for your actual thesis. And again, it goes down to your research question. You have to be very strict in terms of, does this answer or address my research question? And if it doesn't, then it's not included. And whenever I would be, reading, examining PhDs, and I sometimes would write the line, interesting fact, but this isn't relevant to your research question. And it's so difficult for us as qualitative researchers to actually leave stuff out, because we have collected all of this, and you think, oh, I'm just going to put it down. I think it's really interesting, but we have to be quite harsh that if it doesn't address your research question, then it actually isn't relevant for this particular thesis. So yeah, and then we'll look at how to analyze our qualitative data. And I suppose this is one of the challenges, but also, and I don't think it's fair, criticisms that qualitative research would get in comparison to its quantitative methods. because a lot of people would say, well, okay, how did you get to the interpretation? They would feel, oh, that's a bit fuzzy. Of you've got your findings, and then you've got this interpretation, and we just don't know if there was a bit of magic or what happened to get to that stage. And I suppose one of the things that there's been a lot of pressure, and I think it's probably been good pressure on qualitative researchers to become much more transparent when it comes to the data analysis. And I can show you in terms of, I would do a lot of like data structured tables to try to demonstrate, well, okay, this is the excerpts from my transcripts. This is my theoretical, these are my first and second order of coding, and I'll go over that more when we get to that week. And then this is my theoretical aggregate dimensions. So I'm very much showing, well, okay, this is how we got from the quotes, we got to the themes, and then we got to the theoretical dimensions. So it's about transparency, it's about rigor, and it's also about robustness. And that, I suppose, those three things is why in vivo has become very popular, because it answers some of the criticisms, and it also it addresses some of the worries that quantitative researchers may have in terms of, oh, the critical mess that they refer to as qualitative research. And then the writing up and presenting qualitative findings. So I'll do a bit on that, and also the challenges that you have, and also with terms of trying to publish qualitative research as well, because I'm quite well versed in that area. So, okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get you now to go into recording again. So it investigates culture, society, behavior. As I said before, I'm very interested in entrepreneurial behavior through analysis and synthesis of people's words and actions. And I suppose then the actions, if we are thinking about non-participant observation or observation analysis, that's where you can capture an individual's actions. Does not try to transfer verbal symbols into numerical ones, that the data remains as words. So it's not about counting, it's not about frequency, although in some cases, some of the discourse analysis is the words, actually the data remains as words. So the approach lies at getting to the heart of what led to decisions and choices, and how they came to take the form in which they did. And I suppose when I read that very much resonates with my research. It's trying to unpack why people behave in a certain way, what influenced them, and what role they take in their everyday lives. And I'm very much are very much driven by the contextualized lived experience of my participants who happen to be women entrepreneurs. So I need an approach that allows me to investigate that behavior. It allows me to unpack, why they made certain decisions and how they navigate their daily lives. And, I very much, if we go back to the research question, so that's what you're trying to address. And your participants, your sample who you have identified, they have the information you need in order to answer your research question. What you need to decide is what is the correct tool in order to gather that information. So it might be a semi-structured interview. It might be an oral history approach. It might be an ethnographic approach. It might be online. But it's very much, that's the simplicity of it, is that you have a research question that needs to be addressed. You've identified these people, that they have the right information. You just need then to work out which is the right tool. And, I would spend for the genre project, in terms of our interview schedule, which is really just our interview questions, we spent a good month on our research or our interview questions. And, and for me, that was a month well spent. And the reason for that is that those questions have to be perfect, because you probably won't get another chance again to interview this person. So they have to be the right questions to get that information, because we might not get the opportunity again. So it really takes a lot of effort, and we'll talk about pilot interviews and all of that, but for me it's really spending time excuse me designing your tool to make sure you obtain the right information. So qualitative research involves finding out what people think, how they feel, or the bit I like about this is, or at any rate, what they say they think and how they feel. Because obviously it is an interpretation of how they currently feel, and obviously there's a subjectivity to it as well. So it involves feelings and impressions, rather than numbers. And also, what we've been trying to do in our analysis at the moment is actually, is try to code for language. We're trying to code for silences. We're trying to code for uncomfortableness, because we're talking about gender, and in some cases that can be quite a sensitive issue. So yeah, so it's not just, so it's also the feelings and the impressions as well as what's actually said at the same time. So it's a multi-method in focus, and I suppose whenever you may be considering that your primary data collection tool is, say, semi-structured interviews, but you probably will supplement that with possibly non-participant observation. You may supplement it with archival evidence as well. And I suppose one of the things that, it obviously gives you a holistic approach, but also then it helps with triangulation as well. And again, we will talk about that in later weeks, in terms of it's really what triangulation does, it increases the trustworthiness of your research. But it's very much interpretive and it's naturalistic. And typically, whenever you would be interviewing your participants, obviously pre-COVID and hopefully after COVID at some point, that you're actually interviewing them in their offices. You might be interviewing them in the workplace. So it can be very, very naturalist in that aspect as well. So you study things, people and their thoughts about a certain issue in their natural settings, and you're trying to make sense, interpret in terms of the meaning. And I think that's what I like, because what is interpretation and how do you make sense of? And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to work out what is the meaning that your participants attached to certain issues, to certain decisions, to certain behaviors. So it involves the study-induced collection of a variety of empirical materials. We'll talk about case study, personal experience. It could be diaries, introspective in terms of they're looking back. In a lot of cases, they are. One of the things that, that I find very, I suppose, rewarding, I think, about doing a lot of interviews is that a lot of my participants, this is the first time they've actually been asked to reflect on their lives, or even on their entrepreneurial lives and on their careers. And some of them actually find it very beneficial. And yeah, and also they find very rewarding in the sense of, oh, I haven't realized how far I have come or what I've achieved. So there's definitely a reflective development element in doing interviews and being interviewed. Observational, historical, visual text. So they describe the routine and problematic moments and meanings in individuals' lives. Now, that last sentence I think is important, because in a lot of cases, it's just looking at the routine. So it's, as I said, for my research, it's the everyday entrepreneurship. It's the lived experience. So it's what they do on a day-to-day basis. But also then it can be a problematic moment. So, we might refer to that as a critical incident, talk about a crisis moment. And obviously, there is a lot of research being conducted on COVID, and also COVID and entrepreneurship. So that would be a problematic moment. So it's not just about, it can be the routine, but it also can be crisis. It can be critical incidents as well. So some of the common characteristics, we've covered this a little bit, but just to re-emphasize the natural setting. So data is collected in the field, and I don't know about you, but I used to find that phrase very strange, the field. And we talk about, we go into the field. I all kept thinking I'm going into like a green field, but no, we talk about the entrepreneurship field. So it's just a domain, it's a research site where participants experience the issue or the problem under study. One of the key elements of qualitative research is the fact that we are a key instrument and that we collect the data ourselves. And because of that, and we have to talk about, and we will talk about, is this idea of research reflexivity. And basically, that's being aware of how you as the researcher can actually influence and possibly bias what the answers are and what actually is being said. So we have to acknowledge our part in co-creating the narrative. Multiple sources of data, interviews, observations, and documents. And typically it is inductive data analysis where you start from the bottom up, that you allow your building theory, not all the time, but a lot of times you are building theory and you're allowing the theory and the patterns and the categories to emerge rather than going in with a pre-described set of data, or sorry, theory, and also then and testing. So you're allowing it to emerge, and and it's the building of theory. So other characteristics, participants' meanings. The researcher keeps a focus on the learning, the meaning that the participants hold about the problem or issue. And I suppose this, for me, brings up the role actually of your theory, because your theory or your theoretical lens helps you then to make sense of that meaning. And that's why it's very important that whenever you think about, okay, I'm selecting a theory, but what is the purpose of that theory? The purpose of that theory is to actually to shed light on your findings, which in other words means that it helps you to attach meaning and make sense of what your respondents are actually saying. An emergent design, and I suppose as qualitative researchers, we know things change. And I suppose that's, as I said before, that's one of the elements of conducting qualitative research I really like, is that things unfold, they evolve, there's an organic element to it. And it's allowing it to do that, and also to have that flexibility. And as I said, then your theoretical lens is incredibly important because it allows you then to make sense of your data. So when to use it, we conducted, if it's a problem or issue needs to be explored. For me, a lot of qualitative research is exploratory. It's an area which hasn't been looked at or investigated before. You might have a very small sample, and it might actually then, be preliminary research, and then allow it at some other stage to actually be looked at from a more quantitative numbers perspective. But typically for me, it's a new and emerging area. You may need a complex, detailed understanding of the issue because, numbers only tell you so much. but obviously you want to have the meaning, you want to have the context behind those numbers. So by having a qualitative approach, it's going to allow you to unpack all of that and to really give meaning to say what the numbers are. Want to empower individuals to share their stories without the power relationship between the researcher and participant, because regardless whether it's semi-structured, regardless of whether it's a life story approach, your respondents are telling their story. So you're allowing them to give them a voice. And obviously we'll talk about, the skills in being able to do that. Um, and also then the power relationship. So we'll talk about that in terms of research reflexivity. To understand the context and setting, I'll talk a lot about context because for me, research needs to be contextualized. So, and a qualitative approach very much allows that, because if you took a quantitative approach, context would just be a variable. It would just, where for me, the context in a qualitative research actually becomes part of the story. It may be used then to follow up quantitative research. I don't know if any of you are thinking about doing mixed methods. Some people would do a quantitative first, and that's where they would go broad, and then they would use qualitative to go deep, or you can do it the other way around. Very much up to your research question and up to the rationale in which you have chosen. And maybe the quantitative measures do not fit the problem or the research question. So some of the issues with qualitative research, there's no doubt the volume of data. Like there's no doubt that you may not like me saying this, be overwhelmed with how much that you collect, and also maybe heartbroken by how much actually is not going to be used or relevant for your thesis. So also then things that you need to think about the nature of the data. So it mightn't just actually be in transcripts or words, it may be pictures, it may be images. And also, how do you, first of all, capture that? How do you analyze it? And then also make sense of it, but also how do you actually present it? So all of these things, do have certain challenges, but we'll talk about how to get over them and how to present them in a coherent, relevant manner. How to interpret an interpretation, and we'll talk about that and the role of the theoretical lens. Research questions, and for me your research question is your guide for doing research, for doing everything, and it's very much provides the overall steer. Establishing relationships within the data, and we'll talk about that when we get to the analysis and in vivo. In vivo itself is a software package. Now it helps with the categorizing. I had thought when I first discovered it many years ago that it would do the interpretation for me. I can very much let you know it doesn't do the interpretation, it just helps you with the categorization. But we will then talk about getting to the next level, and that's what we refer to as abstraction. And then the theoretical conceptualizations and constructs as well. And, very much trying to make sense of your data, but also in such a way that it actually sets you up to making a contribution to knowledge, your theoretical contribution, because regardless of what type of PhD you're doing, that is the key remit, is a theoretical contribution to knowledge. Okay, so I'll stop sharing for a moment and I'll pause